Somewhere in the tertiary spiral arm of the galaxy, a research vessel called the Methodical Inquiry was having what its crew would later describe as a monumentally stupid day. Not that they knew it yet. Dr. Threlvin Morp, senior xenobotanist of the Chinthari Exploratory Sciences Division, was examining a small metallic cylinder that had been floating through space for approximately 312 Earth years. The cylinder had been launched by a species that, according to preliminary scans, still used combustion engines and believed that sending recordings of their greatest hits into the void was a meaningful form of communication. "Primitive," Threlvin muttered, rotating the cylinder under a molecular scanner. His secondary arms twitched with barely contained academic excitement. But fascinatingly primitive. His assistant, a young Chinthari named Blix Wendrop, peered over his shoulder analog. "Is that organic matter? Dried plant material? Seeds specifically?" Threlvin's eye stalks quivered. "The spectrographic analysis is extraordinary. I've never seen this particular molecular structure. The alkaloid concentration is—" He paused, recalibrating his scanner. "Wait, that can't be right." Blix leaned closer. "What is it?" "According to these readings, this substance would act as a powerful neural stimulant for approximately 63% of known carbon-based life forms. The humans must have sent it as some kind of diplomatic gift. How oddly thoughtful." Now, here's where things started going sideways in that special way that would eventually require 5 separate incident reports and 3 formal apologies to the Galactic Scientific Ethics Committee. Threlvin, you see, had published 38 papers on xenobotanical substances. He had personally tested over 2,000 alien plant compounds. He had once ingested a fungus from Keltor Prime that made him perceive time backwards for 6 hours. He considered himself, not without justification, an expert, which is why he did something monumentally stupid. "Blix, prepare the beverage synthesizer. We'll extract the compounds using heated water displacement. Standard protocol Epsilon 9. Shouldn't we, I don't know, run a few more tests first?" Blix's voice carried that peculiar tone of someone who knows they're about to be ignored. "Nonsense. The preliminary scans show it's completely non-toxic. Besides, how else are we supposed to understand its effects? By thinking about it very hard?" Threlvin's sarcasm was legendary throughout the vessel. So was his tendency to poison himself in the name of science. 20 minutes later, 2 mugs of dark, steaming liquid sat on the laboratory counter. The smell was interesting, bitter, earthy, with undertones that Threlvin's olfactory sensors couldn't quite classify. Blix wrinkled his nasal ridge. "It smells like burnt regret." "That's the spirit of discovery you're smelling." Threlvin picked up his mug. "To humanity's mysterious gift." They drank. For approximately 15 seconds, nothing happened. Then Threlvin's secondary eyelids snapped open. "Oh! Oh!" Blix repeated. "Oh!" Threlvin stood up so fast his chair clattered backwards. "Blix! Blix! Do you feel that?" I feel like I could calculate pi to 1,000,000 decimal places. No, 2 million, 3 million. Why would anyone ever need 3 million decimal places of pi? I don't know, but I could do it. Threlvin was already at his data terminal, fingers flying across the interface at speeds that should have been physically impossible for Chinthari physiology. The molecular structure of this compound. It's obvious now. How did I not see it before? It's a methylxanthine derivative that blocks adenosine receptors in the neural cortex, preventing the normal accumulation of sleep-inducing neurochemicals while simultaneously triggering dopamine production. It's brilliant. It's terrifying. It's making my hearts beat really fast. Blix clutched his thorax. Is this what dying feels like? Because if it is, dying feels amazing. Now, to understand what happened next, you need to understand something about Chinthari biology. The Chinthari species had evolved on a planet with a 26-hour day-night cycle. They required exactly 8 hours of sleep per cycle. Their entire civilization was built around this immutable biological fact. There were laws about proper sleep hygiene. There were committees dedicated to optimal rest conditions. The concept of staying awake because you drank some plant juice was so foreign to Chinthari culture that they didn't even have a word for it. They were about to invent several. 3 hours into what they were now calling the incident, Threlvin had reorganized his entire laboratory, not because it needed reorganizing. It had been perfectly organized before, but now he saw inefficiencies everywhere. The way the molecular scanner was positioned was clearly suboptimal. The filing system for plant samples? Barbaric. The lighting. Don't even get him started on the lighting. Blix, meanwhile, had written 9,000 words of a research paper titled Preliminary Observations on the Neurological Effects of Coffea arabica Extract on Chinthari Physiology. Then he deleted it and started over because the introduction wasn't punchy enough. Then he deleted that and started a third time because he realized he should probably organize his thoughts better. Then he, Blix, stop rewriting the same paragraph and come look at this. Threlvin's monitor displayed a molecular diagram so complex it looked like someone had sneezed chemistry all over the screen. I've been analyzing the other compounds in this sample. There are over 800 distinct chemical components, 800, and they all interact in the most delightfully complex ways. There are acids and oils and esters, and I just realized I've been talking for 6 minutes straight without breathing. Isn't that wonderful? That seems medically concerning, Blix shouted back, also without breathing. Everything is medically concerning if you think about it hard enough, which I am, right now, constantly. Have you noticed that thinking feels louder than usual? At our 6, the ship's chief medical officer, a perpetually exhausted Chinthari named Dr. Ven Rassel, received an urgent summons to the xenobotany lab. She arrived to find both scientists literally vibrating. "Gentlemen," she said slowly, "what in the name of the founders are you—" "Dr. Rassel!" Threlvin spun around so fast he nearly fell over. "We've made the most incredible discovery. This substance from Earth. It's revolutionary. It prevents sleep." Ven blinked. "Why would anyone want to prevent sleep?" "That's what I thought," Blix interjected, speaking at roughly twice his normal speed. "But now I understand. Sleep is just time wasted. Think of everything we could accomplish without it. I've cleaned the entire lab, twice. I've also alphabetized the periodic table, which I know is already alphabetized, but I did it backwards this time, and let me tell you it was very satisfying." Ven's medical instincts, honed over 23 years of dealing with scientists who poisoned themselves, immediately kicked in. "How much of this substance did you ingest?" "1 cup, Threlvin said. "Each," Blix added. 6 hours ago," Threlvin continued. "And we feel fantastic," they said in unison. Ven pulled out her medical scanner. "Your heart rates are elevated by 43%. Your neural activity is off the charts. Your stress hormone levels are—" She paused. "Actually, your stress hormone levels are perfectly normal, which makes no sense given everything else I'm seeing." "That's because we're not stressed," Threlvin explained. "We're focused. There's a difference, a huge difference, a difference I could explain to you in great detail if you have 6 to 8 hours available." "Which we do," Blix added helpfully, "because we're not sleeping, obviously." Ven made a decision that she would later describe to the Medical Ethics Board as reasonable given the circumstances, though perhaps not ideal. She looked at the 2 scientists, looked at the strange brown liquid and said, "Let me try some." "Excellent." Threlvin was already pouring a 3rd cup. "In the name of scientific observation, of course." "Of course," Ven agreed, taking the mug. She drank. 15 seconds passed. "Oh, no," she whispered. "Oh, yes," Threlvin and Blix shouted together. At hour 9, 3 Chinthari scientists had reorganized the entire xenobotany department, recalibrated every instrument on the deck, and begun a heated argument about whether the ship's filing system should use chronological or alphabetical organization. The argument would last for 3 hours and involve the creation of a new filing system that was somehow both and neither. At hour 12, word had spread. The ship's captain, a dignified Chinthari named Plex Thoridon, arrived at the lab to find his chief science officer literally running laps around the room while explaining his theory about quantum foam dynamics. "Threlvin," Plex said, with the patience of someone who had commanded research vessels for 30 years, "I'm going to need you to explain why my chief medical officer just filed 63 requisition forms in the past hour. We haven't filed 63 requisition forms in the past year. Captain, Threlvin skidded to a stop. "We've discovered something that will change everything, a substance that eliminates the need for sleep. Think of the possibilities. We could run experiments around the clock. You could experience complete neural collapse," Plex interrupted. "Chinthari needs sleep, Threlvin. It's not optional. It's biology." "But what if it wasn't?" Threlvin's eyes were wild. "What if we could just keep going?" Plex looked at his chief scientist, then at the other two. All three looked like they'd been electrocuted and enjoyed it. "How long have you been awake?" 12 hours. "That's not that unusual?" "Without any drowsiness, not even a little." Now that got Plex's attention. Chinthari started feeling drowsy after 14 hours. It was as reliable as gravity. "That's impossible." "It's science," Blick shouted from where he was cataloguing plant samples for the 3rd time. Plex made the second decision that would later require a formal incident report. "Give me some." "Captain, no!" Dr. Rassel ran over, though given her current state she was more bouncing than running. "You have responsibilities. You can't just—" "I'm invoking Command Protocol 7 Delta," Plex said calmly. "If this substance poses a potential threat to the crew, I need to understand its effects firsthand. That protocol is for toxic substances. And is this substance toxic? Well, no, not technically, but then someone get me a cup." At hour 18, the bridge crew of the Methodical Inquiry began to worry. Not because anything was wrong, exactly. The ship was functioning perfectly. Better than perfectly, actually. The captain had just optimized their patrol route in ways that would save them 6 days of travel time. He'd also reorganized the duty roster, updated the ship's operational manual, and personally inspected every corridor on Deck 7 because he'd suddenly realized he'd never actually seen Deck 7. But he'd also been humming the same 6-note tune for 45 minutes straight, and his left eye had developed a noticeable twitch. Lieutenant Kryn Vexler, the ship's second officer, stood in the doorway of the captain's ready room. "Sir, are you all right?" "All right?" Plex spun his chair around so fast it completed a full rotation before stopping. "Kryn! I've just realized that our entire propulsion system could be 15% more efficient if we reroute the plasma manifolds through the secondary coolant system. Why has no one thought of this before?" "Because the secondary coolant system isn't designed to handle plasma." "Details!" Plex waved his hand dismissively. "The point is that I'm seeing solutions everywhere. Problems we've lived with for years suddenly have obvious answers. This substance, this coffee as the humans call it, it's miraculous." Kryn had served under Captain Thoridon for 7 years. She'd seen him calm. She'd seen him stressed. She'd never seen him talk to a potted plant about thermodynamics, which is what he was currently doing. "Sir, when was the last time you slept?" "Sleep? Who needs sleep? Sleep is what you do when you run out of things to optimize." Kryn left the ready room and went directly to the xenobotany lab. She found Threlvin hanging upside down from a support beam, dictating notes to Blix, who was typing so fast his fingers were blurring. "What," she asked with remarkable composure, "did you do to my captain?" "Your captain?" Threlvin flipped right side up with alarming agility. "He volunteered, as did half the science department, as did—" He paused. "Actually, how many people have tried the coffee now?" Blix checked his datapad. 32. 32? But we only had enough for— Threlvin's eyes widened. "Oh no! Oh no!" Kryn repeated. "Oh no! What do you mean, oh no?" Threlvin pulled up a display. "We've been synthesizing more. Everyone who tries it wants more, and then they want to share it, and then those people want more. It's spreading through the ship like a really enthusiastic plague," Blix finished. At hour 24, one full cycle since the initial ingestion, the methodical inquiry was in chaos. Productive chaos, but chaos nonetheless. Engineering had disassembled and reassembled the starboard engine twice, making it 12% more efficient, but also causing it to emit a faint whistling noise that nobody could explain. The cafeteria had been reorganized into a system so complicated it required a 3-page instruction manual. Someone had repainted the entire mess hall, a color described in the logs as aggressive teal. And everyone was talking, constantly, about everything. Conversations overlapped and interrupted and spawned new conversations. The ship's communication system had to be temporarily shut down because people were filing so many reports that the computer thought it was under attack. Lieutenant Kryn Vexler stood in the center of the bridge, watching her crew argue about whether they should reorganize the star charts by luminosity or by galactic coordinate. She was possibly the only person on the ship who hadn't tried the coffee. She was beginning to feel like a zookeeper at a very intellectual zoo. "Captain," she said carefully, "I really think you need to sleep." Plex looked up from where he was rearranging the bridge stations for the 4th time. "Sleep? I've never felt more awake in my life. Do you know what I just realized? The Founder's 3rd theorem of stellar navigation has a flaw that no one has noticed in 300 years. I'm writing a paper about it right now." "You're the captain of a starship. You're not supposed to be writing academic papers while on duty." "Why not? I can do both. I can do everything." He paused. "Also, my hands are shaking. Is that normal?" No, that is very much not normal." Down in the medical bay, Dr. Rassel was discovering that treating 32 caffeinated Chinthari was significantly harder than it sounded, mainly because her patients wouldn't stay still. "I need you to sit down so I can run a scan," she told an engineer named Torf Grindel. "But if I sit down, I'll waste time." Torf was currently jogging in place. "I have so many ideas. Did you know the waste recycling system could be 20% more efficient if we—" "I don't care about waste recycling." "You should. It's fascinating." Rassel grabbed him by the shoulders. "Tor, listen to me. You've been awake for 24 hours. Your species cannot function without sleep. You're going to crash, and when you do, it's going to be ugly." But I feel fine. Better than fine. I feel perfect. That's the problem." At hour 30, the first person crashed. Blix was in the middle of explaining his new theory about parallel universe probability matrices when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. "I feel weird." Threlvin looked up from his 19 simultaneous projects. "Weird how?" "Tired. Really, really tired. And also my head hurts, and my stomach feels like I swallowed a small aggressive mammal. And—" He collapsed. Not dramatically, not in a way that would make for good storytelling. He just sort of folded, like a puppet with its strings cut. One moment he was vertical, the next he was horizontal, snoring loud enough to rattle the lab equipment. Threlvin stared at his assistant's unconscious body. That seems suboptimal. Then his own legs gave out. Within the hour, 32 Chinthari were unconscious throughout the ship. They didn't just fall asleep. They collapsed into sleep, the kind of deep, almost comatose sleep that suggested their bodies had finally said enough and activated every emergency shutdown protocol simultaneously. Lieutenant Kryn found herself as the only conscious bridge officer, which was problematic, as she was the second officer and didn't actually know how to fly the ship by herself. "Computer," she said carefully, "activate emergency autopilot." "Autopilot activated. Current course will be maintained. Thank the Founders." She looked around at her sleeping crew. Captain Thoradon was face down on his console, still clutching a datapad. His last note read, "Remember to remember to remember to," and then just devolved into random letters. Down in medical, Dr. Rassel had managed to stay conscious just long enough to pull up the diagnostic scan of one sleeping crew member. The readings were alarming. Adenosine levels through the roof, cortisol crash, neural fatigue, markers that shouldn't even be possible in Chinthari physiology. They burned out, she muttered to herself. They literally burned themselves out. Then she face-planted onto her desk and joined her patients in unconsciousness. Kryn spent the next 2 hours moving bodies. Well, not moving them so much as making sure they were in recovery positions and weren't going to choke on their own tongues. It was undignified work for a Starfleet officer, but someone had to do it. By hour 33, she was the only person awake on a ship full of sleeping scientists. She sat in the captain's chair, looked out at the stars, and wondered if this was what command felt like. Lonely, really, really lonely. At hour 42, people started waking up. Waking up might be too generous a term. Regaining consciousness while wishing they hadn't was more accurate. Threlvin's first conscious thought was that someone had replaced his brain with sand. Hoarse, dry, scratchy sand that hurt to think through. His second thought was that his tongue had apparently died and was decomposing in his mouth. His third thought was that thinking was a mistake, and he should stop immediately. "Blix," he croaked. A groan answered him from somewhere to his left. If this is what death feels like, death is terrible. We're not dead. Then why do I feel like I argued with the void and lost? Threlvin managed to open one eye. The lab lights, which had seemed perfectly reasonable 30 hours ago, now felt like tiny suns dedicated to his personal suffering. What happened? You tell me. You're the xenobotanist. Slowly, painfully, memory returned. The cylinder, the coffee, the hours of manic energy followed by sudden total collapse. Threlvin groaned. We crashed. We very crashed. How long were we asleep? Blix checked his chronometer. 16 hours. 16! But that's double our normal sleep cycle. Apparently we had debt to pay. Blix sat up slowly, looking like he'd aged 10 years. Threlvin, promise me something. What? Promise me we never do that again. Threlvin opened his mouth to agree. Then he paused, because despite the headache and the cotton mouth and the feeling that his organs had been reorganized by a vindictive toddler, he remembered something else. The clarity, the energy, the feeling that he could solve any problem if he just thought about it hard enough. It had been the most productive 30 hours of his life. It had also nearly killed him. I promise, he said finally, never again. This promise would last approximately 6 hours, because across the ship 32 Chinthari were waking up, and 32 Chinthari were realizing that despite the headache and nausea and general feeling of having been professionally beaten, they had accomplished more in one day than they normally did in a week. Captain Plex stood in his ready room, looking at the reports. The optimized patrol route, the updated operational manual, the extensive notes on propulsion efficiency. Work that should have taken weeks. He looked at the empty coffee container on his desk. Computer, he said slowly. How much of the synthesized coffee compound remains? Approximately 14 liters. 14 liters, enough for the entire crew to have one more cup, maybe two. Captain, Lieutenant Kryn's voice came through the comm. Medical is reporting that everyone's awake. Dr. Rassel wants to implement a ship-wide ban on the coffee substance. Plex didn't answer immediately. He was doing math, dangerous math. The kind of math that begins with, well, if we're careful, and ends with incident reports. Tell Dr. Rassel that we'll discuss it at the next senior staff meeting. When's that? Tomorrow. Understood. Plex looked at the coffee container again. Tomorrow, yes. They could wait until tomorrow. That was the responsible, sensible thing to do. They'd discuss proper protocols, safety measures, dosage limits. Tomorrow. He picked up his mug. Just one more cup. One small cup. He'd sleep properly tonight. 8 full hours. maybe 9 to make up for the deficit, but until then, he had so many ideas that needed to be explored. He took a sip. 15 seconds later, his eyes snapped open. "Oh," he whispered, "oh, I've missed this." At hour 48, 2 full cycles since the initial incident, the methodical inquiry had settled into what could only be described as a rhythm. A terrible, unsustainable, absolutely ridiculous rhythm, but a rhythm nonetheless. The crew had split into shifts. Not sleep shifts, coffee shifts. Group A would drink coffee and work at manic speeds for 12 hours while Group B slept off their crash. Then they'd switch. It was inefficient. It was unhealthy. It was absolutely against every regulation in the Chinthari medical guidelines. It was also the most productive the ship had ever been. "This is insane," Dr. Rassel said for the 40th time. She was currently on coffee shift, which meant she was saying it at approximately 3 times normal speed. "We're destroying our bodies. We're developing a dependency. This is textbook addiction behavior. But look at the results." Threlvin gestured at his latest data. "We've analyzed 63 new plant compounds. 63, that's a year's worth of work in 2 days. At what cost? Look at these medical scans. Everyone's stress hormones are erratic. Sleep architecture is completely disrupted. Plex developed a twitch. The twitch is charming. The twitch is a neurological symptom." They argued for 90 minutes. It would have been longer, but they were both talking so fast they covered ground at unprecedented speeds. Meanwhile, in the ship's mess hall, something interesting was happening. 3 crew members who'd never spoken before were having the most intense conversation about stellar cartography in the history of their species. Not because they particularly cared about stellar cartography, but because they were caffeinated, and any topic became fascinating when your brain was running at 200% capacity. "The problem with current mapping systems," declared Torf the engineer, "is that they don't account for temporal drift. Stars move, but we map them as if they're stationary." "Exactly," agreed Pilnep Rossick, a communications officer who normally wouldn't know stellar cartography from a sandwich. "We should be using predictive algorithms, not just where a star is, but where it will be." "Revolutionary," shouted Blix, who'd wandered over. "But that would require recalculating the entire galactic database." They looked at each other. "We could do it," Torf said slowly. "We could totally do it," Pilnep agreed. "It would take years, or 3 days with coffee." They got to work immediately. Lieutenant Kryn watched this exchange from across the mess hall. She was still the only person who hadn't tried the coffee. Not because she had moral objections, not because she was afraid, but because someone on this ship needed to maintain a connection to reality, and apparently that someone was her. "You're going to try it eventually," said a voice beside her. She turned to find Dr. Rassel, who, despite being on coffee shift and arguing with Threlvin 90 minutes ago, had somehow found time to get food. Or what passed for food when you were moving at speeds that made sitting down feel like time travel. "No, I'm not," Kryn said firmly. "That's what Plex said. And Threlvin. And me." Rassel took a bite of something that had probably been carefully prepared, but she was eating too fast to notice. "You know what the worst part is? It works. That's the problem. If it was just making us manic and stupid, we could stop. But we're producing real results, important results. How do you argue against that? By pointing out that you're all slowly killing yourselves? Slowly. Exactly. We're dying slowly." Rassel laughed, which turned into a cough. "Do you know how much I've learned about xenopharmacology in 2 days? More than I learned in 4 years of medical school. The coffee doesn't just keep you awake, Kryn. It makes you better, smarter, faster, more creative. For 30 hours. And then you crash." "And then we crash," Rassel agreed. "But for those 30 hours, we're magnificent." She walked away, leaving Kryn alone with her thoughts and her growing sense of dread, because she could see where this was heading. Everyone could see it. They were on a ship full of scientists who just discovered a substance that made them superhuman for brief, glorious periods. The fact that it also made them subhuman during the crashes didn't seem to bother them. At hour 56, Captain Plex called a senior staff meeting. This was notable for two reasons. First, because he'd promised the meeting would happen tomorrow, and it had now been 2 days. Second, because he scheduled it during what should have been Group A's crash period, which meant half the attendees were either unconscious or wished they were. The senior staff filed in slowly. Threlvin looked like he'd been wrestling with entropy and lost. Dr. Russell was so exhausted her eye stalks were drooping. Even Blix, young and resilient, was moving like he was underwater. Only Plex looked alert, suspiciously alert. "Thank you all for coming," he began, speaking at a normal pace that nonetheless felt too fast. "I want to discuss our coffee situation." "We need to stop," Russell said immediately. "Captain, we're destroying ourselves. The medical data is clear. If we continue this pattern, we'll accomplish things no Chinthari crew has ever accomplished," Plex interrupted. "In 3 days, we've done 2 months of work. In a week, we could do a year's worth. In a month! In a month, we'd all be in medical pods with permanent neurological damage. Would we?" Plex leaned forward. "Because I've been looking at the data too, Doctor. Yes, the crashes are rough, but everyone recovers. We sleep longer, we wake up and we're fine. Tired, yes. Unpleasant, absolutely. But fine. For now, we don't know the long-term effects." "We didn't know the long-term effects of space travel when we first left our planet," Plex countered. "We didn't know the long-term effects of faster-than-light travel. We didn't know the long-term effects of any of the things that make our current lives possible. We learned by doing." Threlvin, despite his exhaustion, felt something stirring. "Captain, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting that we have discovered something remarkable, something that could change everything about how we work, how we explore, how we think. And I'm suggesting that we have a responsibility to understand it fully by continuing to use it," Kryn said flatly. She'd been silent until now, but her voice cut through the room. "You want to keep drinking the coffee. Under controlled conditions," Plex said quickly, "with proper medical monitoring, regulated doses, mandatory rest periods. We do this properly, scientifically." "We're scientists!" Russell exploded. "We should know better. This is textbook addictive behavior. We're rationalizing, we're making excuses, we're discovering something that could benefit the entire galaxy." Plex stood up. "Doctor, I understand your concerns. I share them. But I also understand the possibilities. Imagine if every research team had access to this. Imagine what we could accomplish. Imagine what we could destroy." The room fell silent. Kryn looked around at her colleagues. Threlvin, who'd started this whole mess out of scientific curiosity. Russell, who'd joined in despite her better judgment. Plex, who was now defending it with the passion of someone who'd found religion. And all the others, exhausted and wired and caught between the memory of what they'd accomplished and the reality of what it cost. "Captain," she said slowly, "may I ask you a question?" "Of course." "When's the last time you slept?" Plex opened his mouth, closed it, checked his chronometer. 18 hours ago." "For how long?" 4 hours. 4 hours. After a 30-hour binge, that's half your normal sleep requirement." "I was fine. I felt rested." "Did you? Or did you feel restless?" Kryn stood up. "Because there's a difference, and I think you've forgotten what actual rest feels like." Plex stared at her. For the first time since this whole thing began, uncertainty flickered across his face. I've been productive. You've been manic. There's a difference." The silence that followed was profound. Finally, Threlvin spoke. "She's right." His voice was quiet, almost defeated. "I've been telling myself this is about discovery, about science. But it's not. It's about how the coffee makes me feel. And that's not science. That's addiction." "We're not addicted," Plex said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Aren't we? Captain, how many times today have you thought about your next cup? How many times have you checked to see how much is left? How many times have you told yourself, just one more, and then had three? Plex sat down slowly. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we stop, right now, all of us. We dump the remaining coffee, we destroy the synthesis protocols, and we write this up as a cautionary tale about xenopharmaceuticals and poor impulse control. Absolutely not. Everyone turned to look at Blix, who'd been quiet until now. The young assistant was standing, his exhaustion apparently forgotten. We can't just destroy this, it's too important. Blix, Threlvin began. No, listen to me, all of you. Yes, we made mistakes. Yes, we overdid it, but that doesn't mean the coffee itself is bad. It means we need to learn to use it properly. His voice was rising. Think about what this could mean. Medical personnel who could stay awake during emergencies. Researchers who could work extended hours during critical experiments. Pilots who could develop catastrophic sleep disorders and crash their ships. Russell interrupted. Blix, I understand the appeal. I do. But we're not equipped for this. Physiologically, psychologically, or ethically. Then we learn. We test. We experiment. Isn't that what we do? Blix looked around at his colleagues. Or are we going to just give up because it's hard? And there it was, the question that was really at the heart of everything. Were they going to stop because it was the safe, responsible thing to do? Or were they going to continue because it was the exciting, groundbreaking thing to do? The room divided silently into camps. Kryn could see it happening. Threlvin and Rassel on one side, exhausted and worried. Blix and several junior scientists on the other, still riding the promise of what they'd experienced. And Plex caught in the middle, looking like a man being torn in two. We vote, Plex said finally. That's fair. That's how we do things. Everyone in favor of continuing controlled coffee research, raise your hand. 9 hands went up, out of 15 people in the room. Those opposed? 5 hands. Abstaining? 1 hand. Plex's own. The motion carries. He sounded relieved and terrified in equal measure. But with conditions. Dr. Russell, you'll develop strict protocols, maximum dosages, mandatory recovery periods, and the moment we see signs of permanent damage, we stop. Agreed? I want that in writing, Russell said grimly. You'll have it. The meeting adjourned. Kryn watched her colleagues file out, some energized, some defeated. She caught Russell by the arm. This is a mistake. I know it's a mistake. Russell's voice cracked. But it's a democratic mistake. What am I supposed to do? Stage a medical coup, lock everyone in their quarters? Would that work? They'd probably just synthesize coffee in their quarters using lab equipment and spite. Russell rubbed her face. Kryn, I'm a doctor. I can't force people to be healthy. I can only mitigate the damage. She walked away, leaving Kryn alone in the empty conference room. At hour 72, the protocols went into effect. Doctor, Russell's new regulations were comprehensive, detailed, and according to several crew members, aggressively unpleasant. Maximum of 2 cups per day, minimum of 8 hours between doses. Mandatory 12-hour sleep periods after every second dose. Biometric monitoring, daily medical scans. It lasted 19 hours. The problem wasn't that people were unwilling to follow the rules. The problem was that the rules were designed for people who wanted to follow them. And everyone on the methodical inquiry had now experienced what it felt like to be faster, smarter, better. Going back to normal felt like living in slow motion. Torf was the first to break protocol, just a small cup, just a tiny cup, just enough to help him finish the stellar cartography project. He'd sleep extra later to make up for it. Then Pilnep had a small cup to keep up with Torf. Then 3 other engineers had small cups to help with a reactor diagnostic. Then Blix had a cup because everyone else was having cups, and he didn't want to be left out. By hour 91, Russell's carefully constructed protocol had collapsed under the weight of rationalization and peer pressure. We're doomed, she told Kryn over a meal she was too stressed to eat. They're all going to give themselves neurological disorders, and I'm going to have to watch it happen. Can't you just destroy the coffee? I tried, but they've hidden backup supplies, multiple backup supplies. Threlvin has some. Plex has some. I found a canister in engineering behind the coolant regulators. They're treating it like treasure. What about cutting off their access to the synthesizer? They jury-rigged 3 synthesizers using lab equipment. 3! Do you know how much effort that takes? The same effort they could be using to stop. Kryn pushed her food around her plate. What if someone showed them what they look like? From the outside? Russell looked up. What do you mean? I mean, they're all so caught up in how they feel when they're caffeinated, but none of them see what they look like. The twitching, the talking too fast, the way they start 6 projects and finish none of them. Kryn leaned forward. What if we recorded them? You want to make them watch themselves have a collective mental breakdown? I want to give them perspective. Russell considered this. That's actually not a terrible idea. Ethically questionable, but not terrible. Everything about this situation is ethically questionable. Fair point. They spent the next 6 hours setting up discrete recording devices throughout the ship. Not hidden. They weren't spies, but positioned to capture the reality of what was happening. At hour 96, 4 full cycles since the initial incident, they called another meeting. This is unnecessary, Plex protested. He was on his 3rd cup of the day and vibrating slightly. We're all fine, better than fine. Look at our output. We've accomplished... Watch. Kryn activated the display. The screen showed footage from the past day. Threlvin arguing with himself about sample organization. The same argument. 3 times. With himself. Plex walking into the same wall twice because he was too distracted by his thoughts to look where he was going. Blix starting to explain something, losing his train of thought, then starting over, then losing it again. And the engineering bay. Oh, the engineering bay. 6 people working on the same problem, all talking over each other, none of them listening, accomplishing precisely nothing because they were too wired to coordinate. That's... Threlvin trailed off. That's not... We weren't... You were, Kryn said quietly. That's what you all were. What you all are. On screen, Blix was reorganizing the same shelf for the 4th time, each time differently, each time insisting this arrangement was the logical one. Oh, Blix whispered. Oh, no. We look insane, someone said from the back. We look caffeinated, Russell corrected. There's a difference, but it's smaller than you'd think. Plex was staring at the screen with something like horror. That's what I've been like? For 3 days? 4 days. And yes, I'm the captain. You're supposed to be running this ship. Instead, you've been running around it like an over-caffeinated rodent with a task list. The room fell silent except for the video, which showed Torf trying to explain his stellar cartography changes to a crew member who had fallen asleep standing up. Finally, Threlvin spoke. Turn it off. Kryn turned off the display. We need to stop, Threlvin said. His voice was flat, defeated. Not tomorrow. Not after we finish current projects. Now. But the research, Blix began. The research? Threlvin spun on his assistant. Blix, look at us. Look, we've turned ourselves into twitching manic disasters. And for what? So we can reorganize shelves faster? We've accomplished real work. Have we? Or have we just been busy because there's a difference? Threlvin pulled up a data display. Look at this. Just look. We've started 96 new projects in 4 days. Want to know how many we've finished? 12. 12. Because we keep getting distracted by new projects before we finish the old ones. That's... Blix looked at the data. That's not good. No, it's not good. It's terrible. We've been confusing activity with productivity. Plex stood up slowly. He looked older somehow. More tired. Threlvin's right. This ends now. All coffee synthesis stops immediately. All existing supplies will be destroyed. And we're going to spend the next week sleeping like normal Chintari instead of whatever we've been doing. But Captain... Several voices protested simultaneously. That's an order. The room fell silent. Now everyone get out. I need to file approximately 8,000 incident reports explaining how I let this happen. At hour 104, the methodical inquiry was coffee-free for the first time in 5 days. The crew was not handling it well. Not because of withdrawal symptoms exactly. Kinthari biology didn't work that way, but because they remembered what it felt like to be caffeinated, and normal consciousness felt slow and grey in comparison. Threlvin sat in his lab, looking at the empty cylinder that had started everything. He'd accomplished so much. He'd also accomplished nothing. He'd felt brilliant. He'd also been an idiot. The contradictions were exhausting to think about. "Hey," Blick said from the doorway. "You okay?" "Define okay." "Still breathing, not crying, haven't tried to synthesize secret coffee." "Then yes, barely." Threlvin gestured to the other chair. "How are you?" "Tired, sad, kind of angry at myself." Blick sat down. "I thought I was helping, encouraging scientific inquiry, being brave. You were being caffeinated, we all were. Is there a difference?" "Apparently not." Threlvin managed a weak smile. "We'll write this up. A paper about the psychological effects of xenopharmaceuticals on unprepared species. It'll be thoroughly embarrassing and hopefully educational. Think anyone will read it? If they don't, they'll make the same mistakes we did. And given how the universe works, someone definitely will." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "Threlvin?" "Yes? Do you ever think about having just one more cup?" Threlvin closed his eyes. "Every 16 minutes. "Oh, good. I thought it was just me." At hour 120, 5 full cycles since the incident began, Captain Plex filed his final report. It was thorough. It was honest. It was absolutely going to end his career, but at least he'd end it with integrity. He'd just finished when his door chimed. "Enter." Lieutenant Kryn walked in, looking more relaxed than she had in days. "Captain, I heard you filed the incident reports." "All 9 of them, yes. I expect to be relieved of command within the week." "For doing what any curious person would do? Probably not. Reprimanded? Absolutely. But fired? Unlikely. You're very optimistic for someone who watched her entire command crew lose their minds." "I prefer to think of it as gaining perspective." Kryn sat down, uninvited. "Captain, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. Was it worth it?" Plex didn't answer immediately. He thought about the past 5 days, the manic productivity, the crashes, the feeling of being smarter than he'd ever been, followed by feeling stupider than ever before, the accomplishments real and imagined, the damage done and barely avoided. "No," he said finally. "No, it wasn't worth it. We didn't discover anything worth the cost. We just made fools of ourselves very efficiently." "That's not entirely true." "Oh? You discovered that humans apparently drink that substance voluntarily, multiple times per day, without any of the chaos we experienced." Plex stared at her. "What?" "The cylinder. It came from Earth. The substance is called coffee. And according to the database entry I just pulled up, humans consume it regularly. It's part of their daily routine." "That's impossible. They'd be twitching manic disasters. And yet, according to every first contact report we have, they're not. I mean, they're weird, but not caffeinated weird." Plex pulled up the database himself. There it was. Coffee, a common beverage on Earth, consumed daily by billions, socially acceptable, encouraged in workplace environments. "Either humans have completely different neurological reactions to caffeine," he said slowly, "or they've developed tolerance to something that nearly destroyed our crew in 5 days. There's a third option, which is they're all incredibly caffeinated all the time and just consider it normal." They looked at each other. "We need to contact Earth," Plex said finally, "not to warn them, but to ask them how. How do they live like this?" At hour 138, the methodical inquiry made contact with Earth, or more specifically with a confused traffic controller at the Terran System Outer Monitoring Station. "Let me get this straight," the human said. Her name was Kay Mendoza, and she sounded like someone who had not had enough coffee yet. You found one of our old probes. You tried the coffee, and you're calling to complain? Not complain, Plex said quickly. We're calling to understand. How do you consume this substance without experiencing complete neurological chaos? By drinking it? I don't understand the question. You don't experience manic episodes, compulsive reorganization, the urge to start 9 projects simultaneously? There was a long pause. Are you describing Monday? I'm being serious. So am I. Look, I don't know what to tell you. Coffee makes humans more alert. We drink it to wake up, usually with breakfast. Sometimes lunch, maybe after dinner if we need to stay up late. It's just coffee. Just coffee! It's a powerful stimulant that disrupted our entire ship. How much did you drink? 1 cup. 1 cup did all that? Per person. Over several hours. Another pause. Oh, you don't have a tolerance. That makes sense. First-time drinkers sometimes get jittery. We just build up to it, I guess. Build up? To what? How much do you drink? Me, personally, 3, maybe 4 cups a day. More if it's a bad day. 4. You drink 4 cups of this liquid chaos? It's just coffee, dude. Calm down. Plex looked at Crin, who was trying very hard not to laugh. Ms. Mendoza, on behalf of the Chinthari Science Vessel Methodical Inquiry, I formally request information on human caffeine tolerance and consumption practices. You want coffee tips? Detailed coffee tips, including dosage, timing, and how to avoid turning into a twitching disaster. This is the weirdest first contact call I've ever had, and last month someone called asking about cheese. Fine, I'm sending you our standard coffee primer. It's usually for humans adjusting to space station coffee, but I guess it works for aliens too. Thank you. No problem. And hey, welcome to the Caffeine Club. It gets easier, eventually. Mostly. Kind of. The transmission ended. Did she just say, kind of? Blix asked from where he'd been listening. She did, Threlvin confirmed. So humans also struggle with coffee? Apparently. But they do it anyway. Apparently. Why? Crin pulled up the primer that Kay had sent. It was surprisingly comprehensive. Coffee varieties, brewing methods, recommended daily limits, side effects, withdrawal symptoms, how to taper dosage, how to build tolerance. And at the very bottom, a simple note. Coffee won't make you superhuman. It'll just make you functional. Sometimes that's enough. Functional? Plex read aloud. They drink it to be functional. Which suggests, Threlvin said slowly, that their baseline consciousness is somehow below functional without it, or that their definition of functional is higher than ours, Rastel suggested. She'd been quiet until now, reading the medical data in the primer. Look at this. Humans apparently operate on less sleep than we do, 6 to 8 hours instead of our 8 to 10. They have naturally higher metabolism, more stress hormones. They're sort of pre-caffeinated. That's terrifying. That's humanity. Russell kept reading. According to this, coffee helps them compensate for chronic sleep deprivation, high-stress environments, and what they describe as morning fog. What's morning fog? Apparently humans aren't fully conscious for the first hour after waking. The coffee fixes that. They're not conscious, and they just accept that? They drink coffee about it. The room fell silent as everyone processed this. So, Blix said finally, humans invented a substance to fix their broken consciousness, then sent it into space in case any aliens wanted to try, and we found it and broke our consciousness trying to match theirs. That's actually a pretty accurate summary. Humanity is insane. Yes, Plex agreed, but usefully insane. According to this primer, they have centuries of experience managing caffeine consumption. They've developed entire cultures around it, social rituals, workplace protocols, medical guidelines. So we could use coffee safely, Threlvin said slowly, if we followed human practices instead of trying to figure it out ourselves. Absolutely not! Russell stood up. We are not going back to that. I don't care how safely humans do it. We nearly destroyed ourselves in 5 days. Because we didn't know what we were doing. But now we have information, guidelines, we could... No! But think of, I said no. They argued for 20 minutes. It was almost nostalgic, except slower and with more pauses to remember words. Finally, Plex held up his hand. Enough. Dr. Russell is right. We're not ready. Maybe in a year, with proper training and preparation, we could revisit this. But right now, we need to focus on recovery and making sure this never happens again. But the potential, Blick started. The potential nearly killed us. That's what potential does sometimes. Plex's voice was firm. We file this under fascinating but deadly and move on. Understood? Reluctant nods around the room. Good. Now everyone go to sleep. Actual sleep. For actual proper amounts of time. That's an order. At hour 160, the crew of the methodical inquiry was finally returning to normal. Sleep schedules were stabilizing. The manic energy had faded into embarrassed memory. Projects were being completed slowly and carefully instead of started quickly and abandoned. Threlvin sat in his lab, writing up the incident report. It was humiliating work. Every sentence was basically, and then we did something stupid. But it was necessary. Other ships needed to know. Other scientists needed to learn. His door chimed. Come in. It was Kay Mendoza, not in person, obviously. She was on Earth, but her hologram was remarkably clear for a first-time communication. She was young for a human, mid-30s maybe, with the kind of tired eyes that suggested she'd had a long day. Dr. Morp, hope I'm not interrupting. Your captain said you were the one who started the whole coffee situation. That's unfortunately accurate. Can I help you? Actually, I wanted to help you. See, word got around about your crew's coffee adventure, and a bunch of us humans thought maybe we should explain some things. Context, you know. Context would be appreciated. Kay smiled. Okay, so, coffee. Humans have been drinking it for about 1,000 years, maybe longer. It started in one region, spread globally, became a cultural institution. Wars were fought over it. Economies were built on it. It's serious business. 1,000 years. You've been caffeinating yourselves for 1,000 years. More or less. The point is we've had time to figure it out. How much is too much? When to stop? What the side effects are? Your crew tried to speed run 1,000 years of cultural learning in 5 days. That wasn't going to end well. Threlvin felt something loosen in his chest. Relief, maybe. Or vindication. So we're not just weak. What? No, you're not weak, you're just new to it. Look, when humans first discovered coffee, we went just as crazy. There are historical records of people drinking so much they couldn't sleep for days, having hallucinations, spending entire fortunes on coffee beans. It took us centuries to develop a healthy relationship with this stuff. Centuries. You're saying it took you centuries? Well, collectively, yes. Individually, it's faster. Most people figure out their limits in a few months. But you guys tried to figure it out in days, while doing science. That's like learning to swim by jumping in the ocean during a storm. That's an apt metaphor. Thanks. Anyway, I wanted you to know what happened to your crew isn't shameful. It's just inexperienced. If you want to try again later, with guidance and proper dosing and realistic expectations, humans would be happy to help. We love sharing coffee culture. It's kind of our thing. Threlvin considered this. Thank you, Ms. Mendoza. That's surprisingly generous. Hey, we all start somewhere. And honestly, your crew's story is going to be legendary in human space stations. Remember that time the Chinthari discovered coffee and reorganized their entire ship in 3 days? That's going into the history books. Wonderful. We'll be remembered as the species that couldn't handle bean juice. Better than being remembered for nothing at all. Kay grinned. Besides, between you and me, half the human scientists who heard about this immediately wanted to try coffee for the first time too, just to see what the fuss was about. You're not the only ones drawn to fascinating disasters. After Kay signed off, Threlvin sat in silence for a while. 1,000 years. Humans had been navigating coffee culture for 1,000 years and still struggled with it sometimes, and his crew had tried to master it in 5 days. No wonder they'd failed so spectacularly. He went back to writing his report, but now, somehow, it felt less like a confession of stupidity and more like documentation of a very understandable mistake. At hour 180, 1 full week since the incident began, Captain Plex received a response to his incident reports. He'd been expecting censure, possibly demotion, definitely a very stern lecture about proper xenobiological protocols. What he got instead was 3 sentences. Incident reports received and reviewed. No disciplinary action recommended. Please accept congratulations on successful first contact with human cultural practices. He read it 5 times. Lieutenant Kryn? She appeared in his doorway. Yes, Captain? Did command just congratulate us? Let me see that. She read the message. Oh, wow. They're spinning this as diplomatic outreach. We didn't nearly destroy ourselves with alien coffee. We successfully engaged with human culture. That's the most bureaucratic nonsense I've ever heard. That's command. They probably don't want to admit that one of their research vessels went manic over bean juice. Bad for morale. Better to call it cultural exchange. Plex laughed. Actually laughed for the first time in days. Cultural exchange. We culturally exchanged ourselves into a collective nervous breakdown and came out the other side with new friends and a very entertaining story. I suppose that's something. At hour 216, 9 full days since they'd first opened that cylinder, the crew of the Methodical Inquiry held a small gathering. Not a celebration. Nobody felt like celebrating, but an acknowledgement. They'd survived something ridiculous, learned something valuable, and come out mostly intact. Threlvin stood up to speak. So, coffee, we tried it. It tried to kill us. We survived. Any questions? Are we ever doing that again? Someone asked. Not without extensive human supervision and probably therapy. Laughter rippled through the room. In seriousness, Threlvin continued, we learned something important, not about coffee, about hubris. We assumed that because we were scientists, we could just figure out an alien substance without consequences. We were wrong, spectacularly, hilariously, almost catastrophically wrong. We also learned, Plex added, that humans are either much more resilient than us or much more damaged. Possibly both. Either way, I propose we add coffee to the list of things humans do that we don't understand. Right below keeps wolves as pets, and above eats spicy food for fun, Blix suggested. More laughter. There's one more thing, Threlvin said. Ms. Mendoza, our human contact, sent me a gift. He held up a small package. She called it decaf. Apparently it's coffee that's had the caffeine removed. All the taste, none of the neurological chaos. Why would anyone drink that? Someone asked. According to Kay, because sometimes you want the ritual without the consequences, the comfort without the chaos, the familiar without the fear. He opened the package. The smell filled the room. Bitter, earthy, rich. All the sensory experience of coffee without the danger. So, Threlvin said, who wants to try? Every hand in the room went up. They made a pot. They each had a small cup. And for 20 glorious minutes, they remembered what it felt like to drink coffee without experiencing the overwhelming urge to reorganize the universe. It was nice, not transformative, not transcendent. Just nice. You know, Blix said quietly, this is actually kind of perfect. We get to remember the experience without repeating the mistake. That's called learning, Rastel said. It's what we should have done from the start. But then we wouldn't have this story. Fair point. As the gathering wound down and crew members drifted back to their quarters for some well-earned sleep, Threlvin found himself alone in the rec room, holding his empty cup. Plex appeared beside him, thinking deep thoughts, thinking that we're very lucky to be alive, and very lucky to have learned something without permanent damage. And very, very lucky that humans are apparently insane enough to willingly do this to themselves every single day. That too. Plex set down his own cup. Threlvin, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you regret it, opening that cylinder? Threlvin thought about it. The chaos, the productivity, the crashes, the embarrassment, the discovery, the connections made with humanity, the story they'd carry forever. No, he said finally. I don't regret it, but I also never want to do it again. Same. They stood in comfortable silence, two scientists who'd touched something magnificent and terrible and lived to be wiser for it. Captain? Yes. Humans are incredible. Yes. Terrifyingly so. Think we'll ever understand them? Plex smiled. Not if it takes coffee to do it. They left the rec room together, turning off the lights behind them. The empty cups remained on the table, evidence of a very strange week and the beginning of what would become a very strange friendship between two species, one that consumed chaos daily and called it normal, and one that tried it once and decided that normal was relative, sanity was precious, and some discoveries were best made from a safe distance. The methodical inquiry resumed its mission the next day, traveling through space at standard speeds, accomplishing reasonable amounts of work, and sleeping proper amounts every cycle like civilized beings. And if sometimes late at night, crew members thought about that feeling of limitless energy and perfect clarity, well, that was between them and their therapy sessions. Humanity had sent a gift into the stars, wrapped in metal and mystery. The Chinthari had found it, opened it, and discovered something profound, that sometimes the most alien thing about aliens isn't their biology or their technology, but their ability to weaponize their own dysfunction and call it culture. Coffee wasn't just a beverage, it was a statement. It said, we know this is destroying us slowly, and we're drinking it anyway because the alternative is facing Monday morning without chemical assistance. And really, when you thought about it that way, humans weren't insane at all. They were the most honest species in the galaxy. They looked at their limitations, found a plant that made them worse in specific ways, and decided those specific ways were preferable to the general malaise of unassisted consciousness. That wasn't insanity. That was commitment. The methodical inquiry's final report on the incident ran to 386 pages. It included detailed chemical analysis, medical data, psychological assessments, and approximately 47 separate admissions of, "We should have known better." It ended with a single recommendation: approach human cultural practices with caution, respect, and the understanding that what seems insane to us is probably Tuesday to them. 6 months later, the report became required reading at the Chinthari Science Academy, not as a cautionary tale, but as an example of scientific curiosity, cultural exchange, and the importance of knowing when to ask for help instead of assuming you can figure everything out yourself. Threlvin received a commendation for his thorough documentation. Blix got promoted. Rassel developed an entire new field of xenopharmacological safety protocols. And Plex became something of a celebrity among human space stations, where his story was told and retold, usually while drinking coffee. As for coffee itself, it remained on the Chinthari prohibited substances list, not because it was dangerous exactly, but because some things the official documentation read were best appreciated from a distance, like supernovas, or human rush hour traffic, or the concept of just one more cup. And the cylinder that started it all was eventually returned to Earth, where it was placed in a museum dedicated to unusual first contact scenarios, right next to a display about the time humans tried to explain memes to a species without visual humor, and below a collection of "Humans are space orcs" testimonials from various bewildered aliens. And sometimes, late at night in his quarters, Threlvin would think about coffee. The taste, the energy, the feeling of being more than himself. He'd think about it, acknowledge it, and then make himself a cup of decaf. because he'd learned something important during those 5 chaotic days, something that humans apparently knew instinctively, and Chinthari had to learn the hard way. The trick wasn't avoiding the things that could destroy you. The trick was learning to engage with them on your terms, not theirs. Coffee had tried to remake them in its image. They'd survived by remembering who they were underneath the chemical chaos. That was worth more than any amount of productivity. That was worth remembering. The humans, of course, found the whole thing hilarious.